this is Greyshot151 here, and today on the newest What If for Greyshot Productions, I'm going to be going over one that I've been looking forward to for a while. What if Sweden won the Great Northern War? So, Sweden. When I see the country's name, what does it equate to you? Most would probably say a northern nation that is pretty cold. You hear it's a pretty swell place to live and has some pretty cool furniture. Or maybe it's a great place to start a YouTube channel. But what if I told you at one point the Swedes possessed a Baltic Empire, making them one of the great powers of Europe? Of course, this all came crashing down at the turn of the 18th century with the Great Northern War. But before I dive into any of this alternate history, let me explain what occurred in our own timeline. To briefly summarize the Swedish Empire at the turn of the 18th century, they were a Baltic-spanning empire with a professional military and a king by the name of Charles XII. In 20 short years of warfare, called the Great Northern War, Sweden fought primarily Russia, Denmark, and Poland at first, but a variety of other nations soon joined in, including Britain and Prussia. By the war's conclusion, Peter the Great took away the Baltic holdings of the Swedes, creating his gateway to the west in the name of St. Petersburg, while the rest of the empire was carved away to other European powers. But what if this didn't happen? What if Sweden won the Great Northern War? Let me just say, for Sweden to win this war, it would need to have Russia sue for peace. I won't cover the full history of the conflict, for that I'd recommend Extra Credit's excellent overview of the subject, but even if Sweden won the major battles it decisively lost, like Poltava against the Russians, Peter would never sue for peace without getting what he desired, his Baltic seaport, his St. Petersburg. So for Charles to win this war, he would need Russia to tear itself apart. So for this what if, I would change the Battle of Narva, specifically where Peter was during the battle. See, Peter I left Narva early, thinking the Swedes wouldn't engage his forces, only for the nation to do exactly that the following day. Instead, Peter stays with his forces near Narva, resulting in him participating in the battle, rallying his troops to fight through the blizzard until he's struck by a stray bullet and falls. The ruler of Russia is not dead, just dazed, but his men scatter, giving the Swedes not only a decisive victory against a far larger opponent, but an invaluable captive. Charles XII would be ecstatic, embarrassing Peter by forcing peace upon Russia in exchange for his release. Peter would quickly accept, realizing the fractures which could occur in Russia's leadership if he did not return quickly. If any territory would be taken, it would be minor, with more focus given on reparations. So, with Russia out of the war, Augustus of Saxony, the leader of Poland at the time, would be left alone to fight Sweden, which would not end well for him or his forces. After a few short years of fighting, Sweden would emerge victorious, and Charles would ensure the placement of his own king for the Polish crown. So let's say that because of this, the war ends in 1705. How does this affect the rest of Europe? In Sweden, the victory would solidify Charles XII as ruler and reaffirm the Swedish Empire as a great power of the Baltic. With victory achieved, I believe his focus would shift inward, trying to improve the nation with the same energy he brought to his military engagements, while the Spanish War of Succession dragged on. I doubt he'd force Sweden to join in on the Spanish War, or even care, annoying other European nations with his blunt diplomacy. Most Europeans would still move to court Sweden, hoping to sway Charles XII, but the Swedish Empire would not enter, especially with Russia and Denmark militarily unscathed and ready to strike at a moment's notice. To those that lost, Denmark would walk away in the best position. Relatively unscathed from the warfare, its military would reform and learn from the mistakes it made, like in our own timeline. It would be ready to strike again if a war were to occur. Russia, on the other hand, would be on shaky ground due to internal pressures. See, a Russian defeat, especially one caused by Peter's capture, would create fractures in Peter's absolute power. Rushing into another war may cause rifts internally, so Peter would solidify his rule at home, biding his time for another chance to make his dream come true. Surprisingly, Poland, I think, would walk away from this in the best position. See, Stanislav would align his country to Sweden, and unlike its past relationship with Russia with Augustus the Strong, day-to-day activities would not be influenced as much by the Swedes. Therefore, he would be able to push for reforms across Poland, slowly strengthening the fractured nation. I should stress, Poland in this timeline isn't a puppet. Its interests are just aligned with Sweden if they were to face similar foes like that of Russia. For the rest of Europe, the War of Spanish Succession would end in a similar fashion to our own timeline in 1714, without Eastern interference. France is forced to relinquish its hold on the Iberian Peninsula, and Europe enters a relatively calm period while alliances form in the East. After years of anger deriving from Russia's stunning defeat, Peter would move to court a new coalition against the Swedish Empire in the late 1710s. Denmark would agree, wishing for revenge like their eastern ally, while Frederick of Prussia, not the Great but his father, would also agree in exchange for territorial compensation. The last nation to consider joining the group would be Austria, based on the desire to establish Augustus the Strong of Saxony as their leader once again within Poland. But a war with the Ottomans would stop any such alliance from forming. So in 1716, let's say, Russia would launch their invasion, coupled with Denmark and Prussia in support, so that way Peter can finally claim his prize on the Baltic. Now, this coalition may seem overwhelming, but for Charles XII, he would take the challenge without hesitation, with his Polish ally joining him shortly thereafter. Mobilizing his forces, he'd move first against Russia, while Poland skirmishes with Prussia along their border. To all of Europe, this is the Great Northern War as the years begin to pass. Denmark and Prussia would see the most success in their campaigns. Swedish territory on the continental Europe would quickly fall to Danish and Prussian banners. This would be the easiest territory taken during the war. Danish and Norwegian forces would incur upon Swedish soil, but face shocking resistance from the smaller Swedish forces. On the Polish front, Prussia would eventually invade, but keep within Prussian territory within Polish borders, facing steep resistance from Stanislaus' forces. Russia's full focus would be on shattering Sweden's presence in the Baltic, and Sweden would be pairing these strikes with Charles' unmatched tenacity. Even outnumbered with more hardened troops than in the First War, Swedish victories, even as minor as they would be, would infuriate Peter, but the increased pressure would keep Charles on the defensive. The most likely result of this conflict would be Russia, Prussia, and Denmark eventually winning the war. This would all occur in the late 1710s, early 1720s, roughly reaching the same conclusion at the same time of our own timeline during the Great Northern War. The main takeaway from this being the Swedish Empire was doomed to fall due to the rise of nations around it. Its lack of manpower, resources, and allies ensured its defeat, even if the Empire won the original war that brought upon its original downfall. But that ending's no fun, especially since I said that Sweden would win the Great Northern War, and by technicality, since it is in the title, I must agree to the outcome. Anyway, to go with that unlikely second option again, as the Swedes and Russians continue battle, placing more and more pressure on their respective countries, Peter grows increasingly frustrated and decides to oversee his army personally, leaving Moscow. While away, Peter's son, Alexei, feeling the time is right, and maybe with more support and a bit of more backbone than in our own timeline, decides to go against Peter after a crushing defeat by Charles' forces that, unbeknownst to them, takes the life of the Swedish king. The coup takes place, forcing a Russian civil war, while a new king/queen is chosen for Sweden. Who this is doesn't matter, really. Why? Because I doubt they would have Charles' relentless drive to pursue victory. Meaning diplomacy, not the musket, would come first. Peace is then reached with Prussia and Denmark, ceding continental European lands. Poland is spared any substantial territorial change, while Russia leaves with nothing due to the ongoing strife. And here, as the East reaches peace, bitterly I might add, is where I will leave it for part 2. Until then, I'll see you guys next time with What If Sweden Won the Great Northern War Part 2. Until then, later.